everybody. You're very welcome to a new episode of On Location here with Sean Martin, host of the Redefining Cybersecurity podcast. Marco and I are here in London at Infosecurity Europe at the Excel, and thrilled to have Richard Meeus on from Akamai. Richard, how are you?
Doing very well. Thank you very much indeed for having me on.
It's a pleasure. And you can hear it in the background. The energy is high.
There's a lot of people here today, and I think it's going to be a good few days here in Infosec.
A good few days, absolutely. And it's important to have conversations and to look at what's going on in the field with respects to the threats and how organizations are dealing with those threats. And you and your team have put together a report. I guess it's a regular report you do, and some interesting things popped up in this recent one. We're going to get into some of those, but before we do that, Richard, maybe a few words about your role at Akamai, what you're up to, and maybe a few words about what Akamai does in general as well, if you don't mind.
Sure, absolutely, Sean. So I'm the Director of Security, Technology and Strategy for Akamai and EMEA. And my role is working with our customers and our partners, ensuring that Akamai is best aligned in providing the solutions and protections that they need to ensure that their businesses remain online. And that's what Akamai has been doing now for 25 years, is providing a cloud protection service that is the most distributed in the world. So we have the largest cloud network, 2,400 POPs around the world, almost a petabit per second in terms of capacity. And this allows us to protect some of the largest and biggest brands on the planet.
It's interesting, the last few months I've had a lot of conversations where the word resilience has come up. And the other interesting thing that I've heard is that not just the CISO talking about resilience, the CIO is really looking to partner with the security folks to really understand what resilience means for their business. And which, for me, it says there's a lot of other executive support to really understand what's going on here. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that based on the conversations you have with folks.
I think especially in Europe at the moment, resilience is a massive topic, and that has been driven through by legislation that's going through in the European Parliament. So we've got NIS2, which is coming through, which is covers sort of all sort of critical national infrastructure within the EU. We've also got DORA, which is for the financial services in the EU, and obviously that's going to have an impact on countries outside the EU that do a lot of work with EU citizens. So obviously, a lot of companies over here in the UK are going to be massively impacted by DORA, and both of those are driven around resilience. Right? It's about being available, being online, maintaining the availability of your systems as much as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So in that light, from an operational perspective, teams are going to be required to really put systems and programs and teams and operations in place to deal with the regulations that they have. On the other side of the coin, nothing's slowing down on the attacker side, right? So what are you seeing there?
Yeah, the attackers, as we did in the State of the Internet report that we released today, the attackers have been especially prevalent over the last few years, especially within EMEA. And we've seen a huge increase in the attacks in EMEA. So the US, where we've normally seen the majority of the attacks, has dramatically gone down. And I don't think there's any surprise that with the two wars essentially that are happening in the continent, that there's been a lot of DDoS activity. And DDoS activity has long been the tool of the hacktivist. Right. And I say hacktivist as opposed to criminal or this is a criminal activity, but it's not the same as somebody who's trying to steal data from money. Right. The hacktivist wants to make a point. They're doing their PR. They want to basically make a big bang. And they want to be able to stretch over seas, stretch over borders, stretch over boundaries, and make their impression. And if that means taking down or taking offline an organisation that is very prominent in a certain geography, it's a good way to make that point. And this is why we've seen a huge increase in DDoS attacks in EMEA in the last few years.
Interesting. A lot of it driven by warfare, you think? Are you able to attribute it back to some of that stuff, or?
Attribution's really tricky when it comes to cyber.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier more in kinetic warfare. You can see where it came from. But in cyber, it's a little bit more difficult. We see certain attack traits and techniques, but it's very difficult to sort of say who actually did that particular attack. We know that a lot of organisations were taking credit for it, but we know that people have, for example, at the beginning of the Ukraine-Russia war, there was an activist called Killnet that was very prevalent, doing a lot of attacks against organisations in Europe that were supporting the Ukrainian act, and that was very public. But it's very difficult to know sort of where they actually sit within the political spectrum.
So what else are you seeing in the report that you think might be interesting? Either trends or anomalies from previous times, or maybe actually let's do this first. History of the report. This isn't your first one, right? So I think
we've been doing these reports now for 10 years.
Yeah.
And one of the benefits that we have at Akamai of having this huge network and seeing so much traffic, trillions and trillions of DNS requests a day, terabits, hundreds of terabits per second of traffic, billions of attacks. It allows us to get an unprecedented view on the internet, on criminal actors, on the attacks that we're seeing, the novel attacks that are being created. So every couple of months we will produce a report that focuses on a specific area, and it may be a specific geography, it may be on a specific vertical such as financial services or commerce, or it may be on a specific attack type. So it might be on bots, or it might be on east-west ransomware or something like that. So we'll try and find out something that's particularly relevant from the data sources that we have. And this one we've released today is specifically around DDoS attacks in EMEA. And we wanted to focus on this because of the massive increase, the massive focus on this actually in EMEA. UK sees almost a quarter of all the DDoS attacks that we're seeing. That's a massive amount of attacks. Normally, as I said, the US used to receive the bulk. Now the UK sees virtually a quarter of the attacks that we see in EMEA. So that's a huge hit, followed by KSA, Saudi Arabia, and then followed by Germany.
Okay. Interesting. That KSA would pop in there.
It is, but you have to remember that they have a very loud voice now.
Right.
They're beginning to be more prevalent, and they're beginning to be seen more on the internet around the world. And as anything with any country that is being more prevalent, they will tend to get more attacks. In the same sense that the UK, Germany, all those big countries tend to get attacked. So I don't think it's especially surprising. I think we've seen attacks against the Middle East in various different countries for the last 10 years. And certainly we've been very prevalent across the Middle East in helping organisations protect their infrastructure, their financial services, and that sort of thing.
What can you share with me? Because denial of service, distributed denial of service, not a new concept, right?
No.
But the technologies and the attack vectors through which those can take place certainly have grown. So can you give me a history of kind of distributed denial of service, how it's changed or evolved over the years? I mean, we have IoT, we have AI, businesses now, I don't know, anything you want to share there?
Yeah, so DDoS is quite an interesting thing. It changes and it doesn't change. It's a bit like sort of Plus le Save la Même Chose sort of thing. It's still doing the same stuff as what it's been doing 10 years ago. We're still seeing SIM floods. SIM floods has been part of DDoS attacks for years. We're still seeing a lot of the traditional attack vectors. I think what's interesting is because we're getting the hacktivists coming back, as opposed to the criminal actors who are doing DDoS for ransom, that seems to get a bit of a shift. We're seeing a resurgence of what's called water torture tactics. And water torture is an attack on the DNS of an organization. And this is really important for businesses to be aware of, because a lot of the times people think, I need to protect my website. That's the public face of my organization. I need to put all the protection in front of that. But if your DNS is off the side and they take down your DNS, as we know in security, you take out DNS, everything breaks.
Yeah. That's the old joke, right? It's always DNS.
It's always DNS, absolutely. You sort of hit my punchline for me.
Sorry. I didn't just do it.
And the water torture tactic is a very old tactic that's designed to take out your authoritative DNS. It basically relies on the fact that if you create a unique request or unique subdomain request to a domain, it has to go all the way back to the origin, to the authoritative DNS to find out. You can't use all the cached DNS responses out on the internet that the internet relies upon to scale and to service out the billions and trillions of DNS requests a day. If you create a unique one, it has to go back to origin every single time. So you just keep creating unique, and you create enough places to connect in those unique requests. They all have to go through to origin, and it overloads the origin DNS. And if you overload the origin DNS, bad things happen.
So talk to me a bit. I mean, we see a lot of not just human interaction with systems and applications, but we see apps to apps and machine to machine and API. Everything's API driven now. And with that, as soon as we start to need to trust other things besides people, right? Not new, of course, this concept, but the growth of those things, how does that impact this sort of denial of service where, yeah, a lot of stuff can
No,
request.
absolutely. Yeah, I think one of the things we're seeing now is there's less traffic being going from the website to the user.
Right.
Basically, what happens is you're using an app, and the traffic between your app and the back end is all API.
Yeah.
So the volume of traffic has gone down, but there's more requests going back and forth. But the point is now instead of having like one website we have to protect, we now have 1,000 APIs for it. And they are just as susceptible, they are just as vulnerable, if not more, to DDoS attacks. Because you've got more to protect. You need to ensure that everything is protected. So they are just as vulnerable. And we need to be affording the same level of protection and security to our APIs that we are doing to our websites. And generally we're not. We're not. APIs are sort of a bit of a forgotten thing that tends to get sort of, we'll get to that later, let's focus on the website, when realistically APIs are becoming the dominant trend. At Akamai we see huge amounts of our customers shipping well over a third of their traffic is just purely on APIs. And understanding the scope and scale is where organizations are now beginning to have that challenge.
So talk to me, because as I was describing that in my mind and then to you, I was thinking in the financial sector, like banking, open banking is becoming a big thing, right? And you can buy stuff on credit, and that element of purchasing is available as a service through a number of different services. Anything in the report that kind of points to how the financial sector is also dealing more with DDoS and other attacks and threats like that?
I think financial services has always been a prominent target for DDoS, because whether they're a criminal attacker or it's a hacktivist, they realize the impact that taking down a bank can have. Because if you want to send a message to the population of a country or a region, go after the money. It's always a good way to do it. And I think that, I try and liken it to where banks were 120 years ago. When banks were around 120 years ago, they were trying to get people to give them money. They were trying to get people to all of the population to give them money, take it out from underneath their beds and whatever, and give them money. So what did they do? They built something that evoked trust. They built banks with big, thick walls, high windows. So my money's safe here. It's safe. Who goes to a bank now? So they have no way of creating that trust. The trust is with their digital presence, with their app on their phone, with their website. If that website goes down, they're thinking, where's my money? Just look at the websites, or they don't know the difference between a DDoS attack or a hack or whatever. So they're going to be concerned about that money. Their trust is going down rapidly. So being online, being available is critical to financial institutions to maintain that level of trust. And this sort of goes back to what DORA is being put in place for, is to ensure that the service to the customers, the service to the population is maintained and is resilient throughout.
So is there any connection to, I don't know if it was data that said let's focus on EMEA, data that said let's focus on financial sector in this current report, is there a connection there at all?
Well, financial services is the most attacked vertical for DDoS, by some margin, and as I said, it does go in fits and starts depending on what is happening around the world. Sometimes we see a lot of DDoS attacks against e-commerce, sometimes we see a lot of DDoS attacks against other verticals. Financial services at the moment, and I think this is driven by a lot of the hacktivism around them as well, because again it goes back to that impact the trust, make sure you're known. How to get that word around is going after financial institutions. So that, the fact is that financial services is the most attacked vertical. EMEA is the most attacked geography. So if you're a financial services company in EMEA, you're pretty much bearing the brunt of the global DDoS attacks at the moment.
So, Richard, talk to me about how this impacts the customers that you work with, and ultimately what I really want to know is how you actually help them, because a DDoS attack, you know when it happens, but it's too late, right? At that point.
Yeah.
And then you lose the trust with your customer and your partners and whatnot. So how are your customers experiencing this world, and how do they then get some solace from working with you and the Akamai team to know that you have their back?
So one of the challenges with DDoS is it's a very asymmetric cost burden in terms of the cost to attack against the cost to defend. We've seen a lot of booters that are around for relatively small amounts of money, 10 euros or something like that, to get a booter to launch a DDoS attack. Now, if that can generate sufficient capacity to take your site offline, that's a problem. And what organizations need to do is think about, okay, well, how can we address this? I have the size of the pipe that come into my organization. Organizations might have a 10 gig pipe. It doesn't cost much to launch a 10 gig DDoS attack, which is going to fill that pipe. So realistically, you need to move the problem away from your organization and do it in the cloud, because the cloud has the ability to have a lot more capacity. So what we've done is built a huge global network. We have amongst that scrubbing centers that allow us to take in all of the attack traffic. Doesn't matter if it's 10 gigs, 100 gigs, a terabit, whatever that volume comes in, we can get it into our estate and we can clean that traffic up and just send you the clean traffic down. So they're basically moving the problem, moving the edge of their network out to us, and then we can absorb all that traffic, clean it up, and just send them the clean stuff through.
Interesting, the cleanup, because it's not just absorbing it, right? Because one could absorb it, but doesn't necessarily mean the service is going to continue as you would expect, right? So the cleaning is a big part of it.
Absolutely, and so there's a huge raft of tools that we put in place to ensure that only the clean traffic gets through. I mean, there's different tooling for different attack vectors, whether it's we talked about the water torture attack, or we talk about a SYN flood, or we talk about a network time protocol reflection attack. They're all different mitigation techniques that we need to do. And a lot of that can be done, can be automated, but it also requires management as well. So we have SOC teams around the world who are constantly fighting these DDoS attacks on a daily basis. So their muscle memory and their skill set is unsurpassed, and the ability to be able to detect the novel attack vectors. One of the other things we talked about in this report was the increase in vectors. Normally, a DDoS attack will just see one vector come in and try and take that organization out. Now we're saying, okay, we're not going to hit you with just a SYN flood or just a DNS flood. We're going to hit you with 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, up to 12 different attack vectors all at the same time. And this is when you need to have a lot of skills in being able to bring the right tools into play to make sure the mitigation happens, doesn't block legitimate traffic, and ensures you stay up.
In real time.
In real time. In real time, that's the thing. He's got eyes on glass and hands on keyboard.
Yeah. And as a final point as we wrap here, because the organizations, most of them reside in a specific region, right? But there are certainly multinational organizations as well. And so talk to me, you mentioned your global network sits in the cloud, absorbs and cleans. But as you're seeing activity throughout the world, are you able to kind of help navigate some of that on behalf of your customers, so that if, to your point on EMEA is taking a lot of the hit right now, you're able to leverage some of your services in other regions to, right?
Well, that's one of the main aspects around DDoS attacks is a lot of the times they will compromise IoT devices, or something we saw that with Mirai a few years ago, which is still around, and it will leverage devices all over the planet. And sometimes you may get a router that's released by an ISP in a certain country. We saw it happen a few years ago in Brazil, where a certain type of router was provided by an ISP, and the hackers found an exploit to launch DDoS attacks. We saw huge amounts of DDoS attacks coming from Brazil. We may see it with the Far East, we may see it in Oceania, we may see it in North America. It doesn't matter. We will basically absorb, clean, scrub, process that traffic in that particular geo. So we have scrubbing centers in South America, North America, in the Middle East. We have lots in Europe, we have lots in APJ, lots in Oceania, where we can take all that traffic and just get rid of it locally. Yeah. So if you're a European company, it doesn't matter. It's going to get rid of all that traffic over in APJ or wherever it's coming from.
Perfect. And final question to you, Richard. So let's speak to the CISO here. Advice for them, given the rise and continued increase of DDoS attacks, especially in EMEA and ongoing for the financial sector and others, how would you recommend they approach their security program? How can they redefine cybersecurity given what you've seen in this report?
I think in light of the upcoming regulations that are coming into the EU, it's critical that organisations understand the scope and capability that DDoS can do to an organisation, especially around impacting that trust. And when you start looking at how that trust can be related to the material impact that a CEO is going to be concerned about, whether it's going to have that decision, whether an investor is going to make money or invest in a business. If you're impacting the trust of your customers, that's going to have a material impact. And if you can have a material impact, that's something where you need to focus and say, okay, how can I reduce the chance of that happening? How can I put mitigation in place to protect myself against that material damage?
Got it. All right, so multiple vectors, multiple techniques. You need to be able to scale that and have a team that's ready to handle all of that for you, and that's what you can do.
Well, that's the thing. We can take all what we do at Akamai is we provide the tooling, the capacity, the scaling, the teams, the brains to be able to absorb all of that and just provide you with clean traffic. So we can take the problem and make it go away.
Clean traffic. What a concept. All right, Richard. Well, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. And everybody listening to this episode, please do check out the latest report and probably some of the other ones. I'm sure there's some interesting findings.
There's some
in the
really good reports in that.
Yep.
Check out the back catalogue.
And subscribe so you get the next ones.
Definitely.
And Richard, thank you very much.
Sean, thank you very much indeed. It's been great to be on.